The bells of St. Aldwyn Cathedral rang with solemn grandeur across the capital, their deep voices drifting through the misty autumn morning like an ancient warning no one wished to hear. Beneath a sky veiled in silver clouds, elegant carriages rolled toward the towering Gothic sanctuary, delivering dukes, duchesses, earls, ambassadors, and members of the royal court clad in velvet, silk, and polished metals that shimmered beneath the pale light. To every observer, it appeared to be a wedding destined for the history books, yet behind embroidered fans and carefully rehearsed smiles, whispered rumors spread more eagerly than blessings. Society had gathered not to celebrate love, but to witness what many believed would become its greatest humiliation. The Duke of Ashcombe stood before the altar in impeccable composure, his broad shoulders framed by a tailored black ceremonial coat embroidered with subtle gold thread, every polished button reflecting the cathedral's sea of candlelight. At 29, he carried the reputation of a disciplined statesman whose loyalty to crown and country had never been questioned. He had accepted this arranged marriage because duty demanded it, not because his heart desired it. Throughout the lengthy negotiations between noble houses, he had shown neither excitement nor resistance, believing affection to be an unnecessary luxury reserved for poets rather than powerful men entrusted with preserving ancient family legacies. Even as distinguished guests admired his calm dignity, they quietly pitied the lonely future that surely awaited him. The woman he had agreed to marry inspired far less generosity. Lady Eleanor Ashford entered the capital burdened by stories she had never spoken and accusations she had never answered. Some claimed her family had lost favor through hidden disgrace. Others insisted she carried dangerous secrets capable of embarrassing the royal court itself. Every version differed, yet each ended with the same merciless conclusion: she was unworthy of becoming a duchess. Those who had never exchanged a single word with her repeated the gossip with astonishing confidence, finding comfort in condemning a stranger whose silence allowed every lie to flourish unchecked. Outside the cathedral, Eleanor paused beside her carriage before taking her first step toward the enormous oak doors. Her ivory gown flowed like moonlit water over polished stone, every fold embroidered with delicate lace that generations of seamstresses had crafted by hand. A cathedral-length veil rested upon carefully arranged chestnut curls adorned with tiny seed pearls that glimmered softly whenever sunlight escaped the clouds. She held a bouquet of white roses and lilies, though her trembling fingers threatened to loosen their careful arrangement. There was no father waiting proudly beside her, no affectionate mother adjusting her veil, no siblings offering comforting smiles. Only an elderly governess squeezed her hand gently before retreating into the crowd, leaving Eleanor to walk the longest path of her life alone. The cathedral doors opened slowly. Hundreds of eyes settled upon her. The whispers became almost unbearable. Poor Duke. They forced him into this. She looks innocent enough. Innocence can be wonderfully deceptive. Eleanor heard every poisonous word. Each sentence struck with invisible precision, yet her graceful posture never faltered. Years of surviving quiet cruelty had taught her that dignity often spoke louder than desperate defense. She neither hurried nor hesitated. Instead, she lifted her chin with serene resolve, allowing neither bitterness nor fear to eclipse the quiet strength she had fought so hard to preserve. Then the Duke looked up. He had expected another obligation wrapped in elegant fabric. Instead, time itself appeared to hesitate. The cathedral dissolved into silence. The stained glass windows scattered rivers of crimson, sapphire, and gold across the marble floor, bathing Eleanor in radiant colors that transformed her into something almost celestial. Her anxious eyes searched the aisle not with arrogance, but with heartbreaking courage, revealing a soul determined to remain kind despite every reason to surrender hope. Something within the Duke shifted with startling force. It was not admiration born of beauty alone, though she possessed extraordinary grace. It was recognition, as though his restless heart had spent years searching for someone it had never before encountered. His carefully constructed certainty collapsed within a single heartbeat. Duty no longer stood beside him. Love did. Without warning. Without permission. Without explanation. He watched her approach with an expression no one had ever witnessed upon his usually restrained face. The proud nobleman who had entered the cathedral prepared to fulfill an obligation suddenly found himself praying that the woman walking toward him would someday forgive him for meeting her only because politics had arranged what destiny had always intended. Even the archbishop noticed the remarkable softness settling across the Duke's features, though he wisely remained silent as bride and groom finally stood together before the sacred altar. When Eleanor lifted her gaze to meet his, uncertainty flickered across her delicate features, as though she expected indifference and discovered compassion instead. The brief exchange lasted only seconds, yet it carried the weight of countless unspoken promises. As sacred vows began echoing beneath the cathedral's vaulted ceiling, the Duke made another vow that no priest recorded, no witness overheard, and no royal decree could ever command. Whatever shadows followed his bride into this marriage, he would stand between them and her, never imagining those very shadows had already crossed the cathedral threshold beside them. The wedding procession departed the cathedral beneath a shower of white rose petals, while jubilant bells concealed the uneasy whispers still lingering among the assembled aristocracy. Ornate carriages rolled through the capital's broad avenues, escorted by mounted guards in polished uniforms whose silver breastplates reflected the afternoon sun. Citizens lined the streets, cheering for their newly married Duke and Duchess, unaware that behind every graceful wave and practiced smile rested hearts burdened by uncertainty. Eleanor acknowledged the crowd with gentle composure, though she felt like an actress performing happiness upon a stage where everyone expected her eventual downfall. Ashcombe Hall welcomed its distinguished guests with magnificent splendor. Towering crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across polished marble floors, while towering arrangements of ivory roses, lilies, and climbing ivy perfumed the vast reception galleries. Musicians performed elegant waltzes from an elevated balcony, their violins weaving melodies that floated like silk through the candlelit hall. Servants moved with flawless precision between long banquet tables adorned with silver candelabras, crystal goblets, and exquisite porcelain imported from distant kingdoms. Every detail reflected centuries of noble tradition, yet beneath the dazzling elegance lingered the invisible tension of countless curious eyes observing the new Duchess. Eleanor entered beside her husband, expecting polite distance after the ceremony had concluded. Instead, the Duke slowed his stride deliberately so their steps remained perfectly matched. Whenever distinguished guests approached, he introduced her not as an obligation, but with unmistakable pride. His quiet confidence surprised those who anticipated indifference, and it unsettled the gossip that had flourished only hours earlier. The smallest gestures carried extraordinary meaning within aristocratic society, and every noble present recognized that the Duke's unwavering attention contradicted every prediction surrounding the arranged marriage. The Duchess noticed his consideration long before she trusted it. Whenever conversation grew uncomfortable, he subtly redirected it elsewhere. When elderly nobles monopolized her attention with probing questions, he gently reclaimed her by inviting her toward another circle of guests. He noticed her untouched champagne and quietly replaced it with fresh water, recognizing the faint tremor in her hands that others mistook for weakness. None of his actions appeared theatrical. Each emerged naturally, as though protecting her dignity had already become instinct rather than conscious decision. Across the ballroom, whispers changed their direction. He scarcely leaves her side. I believe this marriage was political. Look how carefully he watches her. Perhaps the Duke has surprised even himself. The observations spread faster than the music, transforming curiosity into bewilderment. Those who had expected cold civility now witnessed unmistakable tenderness blooming where affection should never have existed so quickly. Eleanor heard fragments of these conversations but refused to indulge false hope. Kindness, she reminded herself, could exist without love. She had survived disappointment before, and she would not surrender her guarded heart to gestures that might vanish with tomorrow's sunrise. As evening deepened, candles multiplied throughout the palace until every corridor shimmered beneath warm amber light. The Duke invited Eleanor onto the ballroom floor for the opening dance reserved exclusively for the newly married couple. Conversation faded as they stepped into the center of the polished floor. The orchestra began a graceful waltz, and his gloved hand settled gently at her waist while hers rested uncertainly upon his shoulder. Their movements unfolded with elegant precision, yet neither concentrated upon the choreography. Each became quietly absorbed in the other's presence. You seem troubled, he murmured, ensuring only she could hear. I fear becoming an embarrassment to your grace. You have brought me no embarrassment. You know almost nothing about me. I know enough to recognize courage when I see it. She searched his expression for mockery and found none. His steady gaze held neither pity nor obligation, only quiet sincerity that disarmed the defenses she had carefully maintained throughout the day. For the first time since arriving in the capital, Eleanor felt the crushing loneliness around her begin to loosen its relentless grip. When the dance concluded, applause echoed warmly through the gallery. Rather than escorting her toward waiting dignitaries, the Duke guided her into a smaller drawing room overlooking the moonlit gardens. A fire crackled softly within the marble hearth, casting gentle light across shelves filled with generations of family portraits. He approached an antique cabinet carved from dark walnut and withdrew a velvet case adorned with his ancestral crest. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said quietly. Eleanor accepted the case with hesitant fingers. Inside rested an extraordinary sapphire necklace surrounded by brilliant diamonds, its deep blue stones glowing like fragments of twilight captured forever within silver. She stared speechless, recognizing immediately that such an heirloom represented far more than unimaginable wealth. "It has been worn," he continued, "only by women whom the Dukes of Ashcombe loved beyond duty." Her breath caught. "Your Grace, we have been husband and wife for only a few hours." "I am aware. Then why would you entrust this to me?" He stepped closer, his voice steady despite the vulnerability hidden beneath every word. "Because my heart reached its decision before my thoughts could challenge it." Tears shimmered within Eleanor's eyes, though she fought to restrain them. "You cannot truly know me. I intend to spend the remainder of my life proving that I wish to." For one breathtaking moment, every fear seemed capable of surrendering before such impossible devotion. She allowed him to fasten the necklace around her neck, the cool sapphires resting gently above her heartbeat. It felt less like receiving a priceless jewel than accepting the first genuine kindness fate had offered in many lonely years. Their fragile peace shattered when the drawing-room doors burst open. A captain of the royal guard entered with several armed soldiers, his expression grave beneath the palace lights. Every conversation throughout the adjoining ballroom ceased instantly as guests watched the unexpected intrusion unfold. The officer carried a sealed crimson document bearing the unmistakable insignia of the royal council. He bowed stiffly before the Duke. "Your Grace," he announced, his voice echoing across the silent chamber, "by order of the Crown, Eleanor, Duchess of Ashcombe, stands accused of treason against the kingdom." Gasps swept through the palace like a violent winter wind. Before Eleanor could speak, two guards stepped toward her. The Duke moved first. He placed himself firmly between his bride and every drawn sword, his posture unshakable, his gaze blazing with a resolve that silenced even the captain. "No man," he declared, "shall lay a hand upon my wife." The command echoed through the drawing room with the weight of an executioner's sentence. Every noble standing beyond the open doors stared in stunned silence as soldiers tightened their formation, uncertain whether they had come to arrest a traitor or challenge one of the kingdom's most respected dukes. Candlelight flickered against polished breastplates, casting restless shadows across marble walls that only moments earlier had witnessed laughter and celebration. Eleanor remained perfectly still, though her heart pounded so violently she feared everyone could hear it. The sapphire necklace resting against her throat suddenly felt impossibly heavy, as though destiny itself had become a chain. The captain lowered his eyes respectfully toward the Duke before speaking again. "Your Grace, these orders bear the royal seal. I have no authority to ignore them." The Duke accepted the crimson document without surrendering his position before Eleanor. His calm expression revealed nothing as he unfolded the parchment and examined every line. The accusations were severe. The Duchess stood charged with conspiring against the crown through secret correspondence allegedly exchanged years before her marriage. The council demanded her immediate imprisonment pending formal judgment before the royal tribunal. He folded the decree slowly. "I recognize the king's seal," he said evenly, "but I also recognize haste disguised as justice." The captain hesitated. "I am merely obeying my duty." "As am I." Those three words settled over the room with remarkable authority. No one mistook their meaning. The Duke had chosen his side before hearing a single explanation from his bride. Eleanor gently touched his sleeve. "Please, do not endanger yourself because of me." He turned toward her with quiet certainty. "If danger seeks my wife, it must first pass through me." She lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by a loyalty she had never expected to receive. Every instinct urged her to confess everything she had buried for years, yet fear remained stronger than trust. She had witnessed too many promises vanish beneath the weight of scandal. Hope had always proved more fragile than accusation. After several tense moments, the captain accepted the Duke's proposal that Eleanor remain under his personal protection until sunrise, when both would appear voluntarily before the royal council. Bound by protocol and unwilling to provoke open conflict within Ashcombe Hall, the guards reluctantly withdrew, leaving uneasy silence behind them. Guests departed in subdued whispers, abandoning the celebration long before midnight. Music ceased. Candles burned lower. The palace, magnificent only hours before, now resembled a fortress waiting for siege. Long after the final carriage disappeared beyond the gates, the Duke led Eleanor through quiet corridors toward the oldest wing of the estate. Portraits of forgotten ancestors watched from gilded frames while firelight danced across carved oak paneling polished by generations of devoted hands. They entered the Ashcombe Library, a vast chamber filled with towering shelves, leather-bound volumes, celestial globes, and enormous windows overlooking moonlit gardens silvered by drifting mist. The heavy door closed behind them. For several moments neither spoke. The silence felt strangely merciful. Finally the Duke removed his gloves and placed them carefully upon a writing desk. "You owe me no explanation because we are married," he said softly. "But you deserve the opportunity to tell your story because I believe it belongs to you." His words pierced every defense Eleanor possessed. She approached the nearest window, watching pale moonlight settle across silent fountains beyond the glass. "I have lived with these whispers so long," she murmured, "that sometimes I scarcely remember my own voice beneath them." He waited, never interrupting, never demanding, only listening. "My father served the crown faithfully for decades," she continued. "He was entrusted with transporting sealed diplomatic papers between noble houses. One winter evening he accepted a parcel from a man wearing the king's colors. He believed it entirely legitimate." Her voice trembled. "It was not." She closed her eyes. The documents disappeared before reaching their destination. Weeks later my father was accused of delivering military intelligence to foreign enemies. Before he could defend himself, he died of fever. The confession hung heavily between them. "The investigation required someone to blame," Eleanor whispered. "I became the easiest answer. They claimed I had completed my father's betrayal. No evidence ever proved it, yet no evidence ever cleared me either." The Duke crossed the room slowly. "You were never convicted." "No." "You were never heard." "No." "You were simply abandoned." A single tear escaped despite her determination. People prefer convenient villains to complicated truths. He offered her a linen handkerchief, not to silence her grief but to honor it. "I expected this marriage to end tonight," she admitted. "When the soldiers arrived, I believed destiny had finally caught me." "It has." She looked at him in confusion. "But not in the manner you feared." He gently took her trembling hands within his own. "The innocent often spend their lives apologizing for crimes committed by others." The quiet conviction in his voice dissolved the last barrier around her heart. Tears flowed freely now, years of loneliness escaping in silent surrender. She had imagined countless versions of this conversation throughout restless nights, yet none had included compassion. "I cannot ask you to believe me." "You need not ask." "Why?" "Because falsehood hides behind certainty." He held her gaze. Truth usually arrives carrying wounds. For the first time since childhood, Eleanor allowed herself to believe someone truly saw her rather than the scandal surrounding her name. The Duke released her hands only long enough to unlock an antique cabinet concealed behind an enormous atlas. Inside rested bundles of correspondence tied with faded ribbons, estate ledgers, diplomatic journals, and personal letters collected by generations of Ashcombe statesmen. "My family preserved copies of every significant communication crossing this estate," he explained. "If your father was deceived, someone benefited." Hope flickered cautiously within Eleanor. "You believe evidence still exists?" "I believe lies rarely travel alone." Together they began examining forgotten records beneath the warm glow of oil lamps. Hours slipped quietly past as dusty pages revealed unfamiliar signatures, unexplained payments, and coded references linking influential nobles to secret meetings held years before Eleanor's father's disgrace. Piece by piece, an invisible pattern slowly emerged, suggesting that the accusation against her family had never been an isolated tragedy but one carefully woven into a much larger design. Far beyond the library walls, hidden among ancient yew trees overlooking the sleeping palace, a cloaked rider watched a single candle burning in the Duke's window. Realizing the newlyweds had begun uncovering truths meant to remain buried forever, the stranger unfolded a narrow steel dagger, accepted a purse of gold from an unseen accomplice, and whispered only 4 chilling words before disappearing into the darkness. "Kill the Duchess before dawn." Darkness settled over Ashcombe Hall like a gathering storm, wrapping the ancient estate in uneasy silence. Every corridor seemed to breathe with expectation, as though the centuries-old manor itself sensed that its newest mistress had become the center of a dangerous game. Outside, cold winds stirred the towering oaks, carrying restless whispers through iron gates while clouds swallowed the moon, leaving only scattered lanterns to illuminate the sprawling grounds. Inside the library, however, another kind of light burned steadily. Oil lamps glowed across the massive oak table where forgotten ledgers, diplomatic correspondence, and faded journals lay open before the Duke and Eleanor, each fragile page bringing them closer to a truth someone had been willing to kill to protect. The Duke leaned over an aging map marked with handwritten notes dating back nearly 20 years. His sharp eyes moved from one signature to another until they paused upon a familiar crest. "This seal," he said quietly, "belongs to Lord Blackthorn." Eleanor looked up immediately. He was one of Father's closest allies. He remained one of the king's most trusted advisors after your father's death. A heavy silence followed. The realization settled between them with chilling precision. Whoever had orchestrated the betrayal had not merely survived the scandal. They had prospered because of it. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she reached for another bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. The parchment crackled softly beneath her touch. Hidden among routine estate records rested a private correspondence exchange between Ashcombe's late father and an unnamed royal investigator. The final page contained only a single unfinished sentence. "If anything should happen to me, seek the ledger beneath." The ink ended abruptly. Nothing followed. The Duke stared at the incomplete message. He never finished writing it. "No," Eleanor whispered. Someone interrupted him. The room suddenly felt colder. Before either could speak again, a violent crash echoed somewhere beyond the library walls. Both turned instantly. Another sound followed. Glass shattering. The Duke extinguished two nearby lamps with a swift movement, plunging half the room into shadow. "Stay behind me." His voice remained calm, but every instinct sharpened. Years of military service had taught him the language of danger. Someone had entered the estate. Footsteps echoed faintly through the western corridor. Measured, patient, deliberate. The Duke quietly removed an ornate pistol from a locked cabinet, checking its chamber before handing Eleanor a small silver dagger concealed beside it. "I pray you never need this." She accepted it with uncertain hands. "I have never held a weapon." "Then hold on to your courage instead." Another crash echoed closer. A servant's terrified scream shattered the silence. The Duke opened the library door only slightly and peered into the dim corridor. Shadows stretched endlessly beneath flickering wall sconces. One frightened footman stumbled around the corner, breathless and pale. "Your Grace," he gasped. "The guards? Someone attacked them in the courtyard." "How many intruders?" "We only saw one." The servant hesitated. "But he moved like 10. The Duke immediately understood. This was no common assassin. It was someone professionally trained. He ordered the servant to gather every remaining guard and escort the household staff into the chapel beneath the east wing. "No one leaves until I return." The frightened man hurried away. The Duke closed the door again. Eleanor looked toward him with quiet determination. "I will not hide. I never intended for you to." Together they moved through a concealed doorway hidden behind towering bookshelves, entering a narrow stone passage built generations earlier as an escape route during times of civil unrest. Ancient walls enclosed them as they descended winding steps illuminated only by a single lantern. The air smelled of damp earth and forgotten history. Halfway down the passage, they reached a small chamber containing old chests and abandoned furniture. There, the Duke discovered exactly what he had been searching for. A heavy leather ledger wrapped carefully in oilcloth. He opened it. His expression hardened immediately. Every payment made by the royal treasury over the past 15 years had been meticulously recorded. One name appeared repeatedly: Lord Blackthorn. Beside each payment stood coded references linking military intelligence, intercepted correspondence, and confidential royal investigations. At the bottom of the final page appeared one devastating entry: Operation Ashford complete. Witness eliminated. Eleanor stared at the words. Her knees nearly gave way. "My father." The Duke closed the ledger gently. "He never betrayed the crown. He was murdered." Before she could answer, the narrow passage exploded with the sound of steel striking stone. A masked figure landed silently behind them. His black cloak blended almost perfectly with the darkness. Only his polished dagger reflected the lantern's trembling flame. Without hesitation, the assassin lunged toward Eleanor. The Duke intercepted the attack. Steel clashed violently. The confined passage erupted into a desperate struggle. The assassin fought with terrifying precision, each strike aimed not at victory but execution. The Duke matched every movement with disciplined skill, forcing the attacker backward despite the narrow space. Sparks flew as blades collided again and again. Eleanor pressed herself against the stone wall, clutching the precious ledger beneath one arm. She realized instantly that the assassin cared less about killing the Duke than recovering the evidence. The ledger was the true target. The masked man suddenly changed direction, feinting toward the Duke before spinning directly toward Eleanor. She froze. The silver dagger felt impossibly small. The assassin's blade descended. Instinct overcame fear. She stepped aside at the final instant. His weapon struck the stone wall instead. For a fraction of a second he lost his balance. The Duke seized the opportunity. With one powerful movement, he disarmed the attacker, sending the dagger skidding across the floor. The assassin stumbled backward. Realizing capture was inevitable, he reached inside his cloak. The Duke expected another weapon. Instead, the man swallowed a small black capsule. Within seconds he collapsed onto the cold stones. Foam gathered at his lips. By the time the Duke reached him, he was already dead. No interrogation. No confession. Only silence. The Duke searched the body carefully. Inside the assassin's coat rested a single folded parchment sealed with black wax. He broke the seal. There was no signature. Only one handwritten instruction. Kill the Duchess. Recover the Ashcombe ledger. Leave no witnesses. Below the message appeared the crest of a noble house. Not Blackthorn's. The royal crest itself. Eleanor stared at the seal in horror. If the palace ordered this. The Duke slowly folded the letter. His face remained composed, but the fire in his eyes had changed forever. No, he said quietly. Someone inside the palace did. Above them, the great bells of Ashcombe Hall suddenly began ringing wildly through the darkness. Not for celebration. Not for prayer. But because the castle guards had spotted an entire column of royal soldiers surrounding the estate. The thunder of marching boots rolled across the grounds of Ashcombe Hall as hundreds of royal soldiers surrounded the ancient estate, their lanterns glowing through the rain like a ring of imprisoned stars. Every gate stood sealed beneath rows of mounted cavalry, while banners bearing the royal crest fluttered violently in the midnight wind. From the highest tower, alarm bells continued their desperate cry, echoing across forests and distant villages until the entire countryside knew that something extraordinary had unfolded within the Duke's ancestral home. Yet inside the hidden passage, Duke Alexander Ashcombe looked not at the soldiers gathering outside but at the folded order bearing the royal seal. His expression remained calm, though the certainty in his eyes had become unbreakable. Whoever had manipulated the crown had mistaken duty for obedience. They had never encountered a man willing to sacrifice everything for love. Eleanor stood beside him clutching the Ashcombe ledger against her chest. Only hours earlier she had entered the cathedral believing herself condemned to a lonely marriage built upon obligation. Now she found herself standing beside a husband who had chosen her over reputation, power, and even his own safety. She looked into his face with quiet sorrow. You can still save yourself. He met her gaze without hesitation. There has never been a moment when saving myself mattered more than saving you. The simplicity of his answer carried greater power than any elaborate declaration. Together they emerged from the concealed passage into the great entrance hall where loyal servants and household guards awaited instructions. Fear lingered upon every face, yet none abandoned their positions. The Duke addressed them not as servants but as companions who had shared generations beneath the Ashcombe name. No one is compelled to remain. Not a single person moved. One elderly butler stepped forward. We served your father. Another guard placed his sword upon his shoulder. We shall serve you. The Duke bowed his head with quiet gratitude before leading them toward the front courtyard. Rain poured relentlessly as the massive oak doors opened. Across the stone bridge leading to the estate stood nearly 300 royal soldiers arranged in disciplined ranks. At their center waited Lord Blackthorn dressed in crimson ceremonial robes, his silver hair untouched by the storm beneath an embroidered cloak. He no longer concealed his satisfaction. Years of carefully constructed deception had finally reached its decisive moment. You have become remarkably troublesome, Your Grace, Blackthorn called. You mistake truth for trouble. I mistake nothing. His smile widened. Hand over the ledger and surrender your wife. The Duke descended the front steps until only a few yards separated them. You murdered an innocent man. I protected a kingdom. You protected your ambition. Blackthorn's pleasant expression vanished. The kingdom remembers victories, not methods. The kingdom, the Duke replied, has forgotten the meaning of honor. Without another warning, Blackthorn raised one gloved hand. Archers lifted their bows. Before they could release a single arrow, the deep blast of hunting horns echoed through the valley. Every soldier turned. From the eastern hills rode dozens of cavalry wearing the king's personal colors. At their head rode the monarch himself. King Edward dismounted without ceremony, his weathered face darkened by controlled fury. Behind him came members of the Privy Council, judges of the High Court, and the Archbishop who had blessed the wedding only hours before. Blackthorn's confidence faltered for the first time. "Your Majesty," he began. The king silenced him with one raised hand. "I have listened to your counsel for 15 years. His voice carried across the courtyard. "Tonight I shall listen to evidence." The Duke stepped forward and presented the Ashcombe ledger together with the assassin's written orders. Royal clerks examined every page beneath lantern light while judges compared signatures, treasury seals, and payment records. One by one their expressions changed from skepticism to disbelief. The oldest judge finally looked toward the king. Every accusation against the Duchess was manufactured. Another counselor added quietly, "The funds financing these operations were authorized through Lord Blackthorn." The Archbishop closed his eyes in grief. So many innocent lives. Blackthorn suddenly drew a concealed pistol. If he could no longer preserve his conspiracy, he would erase its final witness. He aimed directly at Eleanor. The shot echoed across the courtyard. Without thinking, the Duke threw himself before her. The bullet tore through his shoulder instead. He staggered but remained standing. Royal guards rushed forward. Blackthorn attempted to flee toward his horse, but cavalry intercepted him before he crossed the bridge. Within moments he stood surrounded, disarmed, and chained beneath the same royal banner he had corrupted for so many years. Eleanor caught the Duke before he collapsed completely. Blood stained the front of his ceremonial coat. Tears blurred her vision. "Please." Her voice broke. "You promised you would not leave me." He smiled despite the pain. "I made a better promise." She held him tightly. "You kept it." Royal physicians hurried forward, binding his wound before the bleeding became fatal. As dawn slowly broke beyond the rain clouds, golden sunlight spilled across the estate, illuminating the soaked courtyard where lies had finally surrendered to truth. The king approached Eleanor personally and bowed his head. "Duchess Ashcombe," he said with unmistakable sincerity, "the crown failed you." He turned toward the assembled nobles. "Let it be recorded before every witness that Eleanor Ashcombe is innocent of every charge ever brought against her. Her father's honor is restored. His name shall be engraved among the kingdom's faithful servants." Silence swept through the gathered crowd. Then one by one, every noble who had mocked her, every courtier who had whispered against her, every aristocrat who had doubted her dignity, lowered their heads, not from obligation, from shame. Several weeks later, when the Duke had recovered sufficiently to stand without assistance, the royal court assembled once more inside St. Aldwyn Cathedral. The same stained-glass windows scattered rivers of crimson, sapphire, and gold across the marble floor where everything had first begun. This time there were no whispers, no accusations, only expectant silence. Alexander took Eleanor's hands before the entire kingdom. His voice remained steady, though emotion softened every word. "The moment you walked down this aisle, before you spoke a single vow, before I knew your story, my heart chose you. I believed duty had brought me here. Instead, heaven did. Crowns may pass from one generation to another. Kingdoms may rise and fall. But if I were granted 1,000 lifetimes, I would seek only one blessing in every age." He smiled gently. "To watch you walk toward me again." Eleanor's tears reflected the cathedral light like tiny diamonds. "I would choose you in every lifetime." The cathedral bells rang with joyful triumph, their music carrying across the kingdom as husband and wife embraced beneath the same altar where strangers had once stood. History remembered many rulers for battles won and empires expanded, yet generations spoke longest of the Duke who fell in love with his bride before she reached the altar, surrendered his title before his honor, and proved that the strongest throne any soul could ever claim was a faithful heart guarded by everlasting love. If you like my content, don't forget to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments.